Earth, once a thriving planet full of life, now lay in ruins. The skies were choked with smoke from endless battles, and the cities that once stood tall and proud had been reduced to rubble. The Krath, an alien race of unstoppable warriors, had arrived years ago and quickly turned Earth into a battlefield. They were powerful, merciless, and determined to conquer the planet. It seemed like no force could stand against them. Captain Elias Juno was used to war. He had fought in countless battles, seen his comrades fall, and witnessed the destruction of everything he had once known. But this felt different. The city he now moved through was no longer recognizable. The streets, once filled with people, were now empty. The buildings were nothing more than broken shells, reminders of the lives that had been lost. The smell of burning wood and twisted metal filled the air. Elias had been sent on a mission to search the city for any survivors. It was a task that, over time, had become more of a routine than anything else. But today, as he moved through the rubble, he had the unsettling feeling that something was different. He couldn't shake the feeling that this was not just another day in the war. As he passed a fallen building, Elias paused. There, in the shadow of the crumbling structure, he heard it. A soft sound, like a whisper. His heart raced. He had learned to trust his instincts over the years, and this was one of those moments when his gut told him that something important was just beyond his reach. He dropped to his knees and began digging through the debris. His hands moved quickly, pushing aside broken pieces of concrete, twisted metal, and shattered glass. The work was exhausting, but Elias didn't stop. He knew that if someone, anyone, was still alive, they needed help. Then suddenly, his fingers brushed something warm. He stopped and pulled back the debris to reveal a figure. It was a woman, badly injured, her body covered in bruises and blood. She lay unconscious, her face pale, her body barely clinging to life. Elias's breath caught in his throat. Her skin was unlike anything he had ever seen before. It shimmered with a greenish hue, smooth and almost ethereal in its appearance. She looked human, yet there was something distinctly alien about her, something that made her stand out, even in a world that had been filled with creatures from all over the galaxy. Elias didn't waste a moment. He carefully lifted her into his arms, cradling her fragile form against his chest. Her body was light, as if the weight of her existence had been stripped away by the destruction around her. Her breath was shallow, each one a struggle, and Elias could feel her heart beating weakly against his own. "Stay with me," he muttered, his voice rough as he hurried through the streets. He didn't know who she was, or what had happened to her. But he couldn't just leave her there. She had to be saved. Elias moved through the war-torn city, his mind racing with questions. The Krath had been merciless in their attack on Earth, and no one had been spared. Who was this woman? Why was she here? And why, of all the people Elias had seen fall in battle, did he feel so compelled to save her? As he reached the edge of the city, Elias found a small, hidden shelter, one of the few places that still offered any safety. He placed the woman gently on a cot and started to assess her injuries. Her clothes were torn, her skin bruised and bloodied. She had been through something terrible, but Elias wasn't sure what. He tried to calm himself, focusing on the task at hand. The Krath had no mercy for those they conquered, and Elias knew that time was running out. He had to keep her alive. The last thing he wanted was to fail her, to let her die alone in a world that had already lost so much. But just as Elias began to assess her wounds, something strange happened. The woman stirred, her eyelids fluttering open. Her eyes were a brilliant shade of violet, filled with a depth that Elias had never seen before. They locked onto his, and for a moment, he felt as if she could see straight into his soul. "Please." Her voice was weak, barely a whisper, but it carried the weight of 1,000 fears. "Please save my baby." The words hit Elias like a punch to the gut. He froze, his mind struggling to process what she had just said. Baby? She was pregnant? In all the chaos of the war, Elias had seen countless tragedies, but nothing had prepared him for this. Her hands trembled as she placed them protectively over her stomach, as if she was guarding something precious. Tears welled in her eyes, and she tried to speak again, but her voice failed her. Instead, she reached out to him, her fingers brushing against his arm as if asking for reassurance. Elias swallowed hard, trying to steady himself. He had never been a father, never even thought about it. But in that moment, with the weight of her plea resting on his shoulders, something inside him shifted. This wasn't just another mission. This wasn't just another soldier lost in the fight. This was life. Elias had always believed in the cause. He had fought for humanity's survival. But in that moment, holding this alien woman, feeling the fragile life inside her, he realized that maybe survival wasn't enough. Maybe, just maybe, they needed something more than just victory. They needed hope. And for the first time in a long while, Elias wondered if he was capable of saving not just a life, but an entire future. Elias couldn't stop thinking about her words. "Please save my baby." The woman's voice haunted him as he sat in the small shelter, watching over her as she slept. Her breathing had steadied, but she was still weak, her body struggling to heal from the injuries it had sustained. Elias had done what he could for her wounds, but there was no guarantee that she would survive. Yet, the thought of failure filled him with dread. He couldn't let her die. Not now. Not like this. He paced the small room, his boots scraping softly against the concrete floor. His thoughts were a whirlwind of questions and emotions. Who was she? What was her story? And most importantly, how could he protect her and her unborn child in a world so broken? The woman, whose name he still didn't know, was resting on the cot. Her violet eyes were closed, her chest rising and falling with each shallow breath. Elias watched her carefully, noting the strange markings that ran along her arms and neck, alien symbols he didn't understand. Despite the battle-scarred appearance of her body, there was an undeniable beauty in her features. Her face, though worn and bruised, held a grace that was almost otherworldly. But it was the way she carried herself, the quiet strength in her. Every gesture, that truly captivated him. For the first time in a long while, Elias found himself unsure of what to do. His instincts told him to keep her safe, to protect the baby inside her. But how could he do that in a world where danger lurked at every corner? The Krath were relentless, and they would stop at nothing to destroy any hope of resistance. Elias knew that if they found her, if they found the child, they would destroy it, no questions asked. But Elias wasn't the kind of man to give up easily. He had seen too much, fought too hard, to turn away from someone in need. The woman had trusted him with her last wish. He wouldn't let her down. After hours of rest, the woman finally stirred. Her eyes fluttered open, and she looked around. The room disoriented. She seemed to be searching for something, her hands moving weakly across the cot. Elias stepped forward cautiously, kneeling by her side. "You're awake," he said softly. His voice was gentle, unsure of how she would respond. The woman's violet eyes locked onto his, her gaze filled with a mixture of relief and fear. "Where am I?" she whispered, her voice still weak but stronger than before. "Am I safe?" Elias nodded. "You're safe for now. You're in a shelter, hidden from the Krath forces." Her eyes closed for a moment, and Elias could see the weight of her exhaustion. She was trying to gather her strength, but it was clear that she had been through unimaginable pain. Her hands once again rested on her stomach, and Elias could see the protective instinct in her every movement. I don't know how long I can last, she said, her voice barely audible. I need you to promise me something, human. Elias felt a chill run down his spine. He had already promised to save her baby, but he couldn't help but wonder what more she needed from him. He nodded slowly, his gaze never leaving her face. Anything. The woman's eyes softened with sadness, and she took a deep breath before speaking again. The Krath. They've been hunting my people for years. I am one of the last of my kind. They will stop at nothing to destroy us. My child, he is the last hope. Please, protect him. He is our future. Elias felt a knot form in his chest. He had heard stories of the Krath's cruelty, their relentless hunt for any species that resisted their rule. The idea that this child, this innocent life, could be the key to ending the war was a heavy burden to bear. But Elias couldn't back away now, not after hearing her words, not after everything he had seen. He had already promised to save her child. Now, he would make sure that promise was kept. I swear to you, Elias said, his voice firm and steady, I will protect him. I'll keep him safe. Tears welled up in the woman's eyes, but she smiled, a faint but genuine expression of relief crossing her face. Thank you, she whispered. You are our last hope. With those final words, she fell silent, her body once again succumbing to exhaustion. Elias could only watch as she slept, her breath steady but shallow. He knew that the coming days would be difficult. The Krath would be looking for her, and if they found her here, if they found the child, Elias clenched his fists. He wouldn't let them take her. He wouldn't let them destroy the last hope of an entire species. Hours passed, and as the night deepened, Elias sat beside her, staring into the dark void outside the shelter. The world was broken, but there was a flicker of light in the darkness. The child, the woman's last gift, was still alive, and Elias would make sure it stayed that way. But how? The Krath were everywhere, their forces were vast, and their reach stretched across the galaxy. Elias had heard rumors of their power, how they had wiped out entire civilizations in the blink of an eye. The Krath were unstoppable, but Elias wasn't like the others. He wasn't a soldier just following orders. He was a man who had seen too much to back down now. If he had to fight alone, he would. If he had to risk everything to protect this child, he would do it without hesitation. He stood up and moved to the small window, peering out into the darkened city. In the distance, he could hear the faint rumble of Krath ships moving through the skies. They were out there, hunting for survivors, searching for anyone who dared to resist their rule. But they wouldn't find him. Not yet. Elias had time. Time to protect the woman. Time to protect the child. And in this broken world, that was all he had left. The days that followed were filled with tension and uncertainty. Elias could feel the weight of the promise he had made to the alien woman pressing on him, but he did not falter. Every moment he spent in the shelter, he kept one eye on the door, and the other on her, knowing that danger could strike at any time. The Krath were merciless, and no one, no matter how small or helpless, was beyond their reach. The woman had been growing weaker with each passing day. Her breathing became labored, and she was rarely awake for long stretches of time. When she was awake, her gaze would always return to her stomach, her hands gently caressing the life growing inside her. Elias watched her with quiet determination, always prepared to do whatever was needed, though he had no idea what that might be. Despite the danger they were in, Elias knew that the birth of her child was drawing near. The woman's condition had worsened, and the strain of carrying the child in such a fragile state was beginning to take its toll. Elias could see it in her face, the exhaustion, the pain, the desperation. She was fading, and every moment felt like it could be her last. The baby needed to survive. It was the only thing that mattered now. One evening, after another sleepless night of keeping watch, Elias noticed a change. The woman's breathing had become shallow, ragged. Her face was pale, and she was sweating despite the cool air in the shelter. She had always been quiet, but now she let out soft moans as if she was in deep pain. Elias rushed to her side. "Hey," he said softly, touching her arm. "You're okay. Just breathe." But the woman's eyes fluttered open and locked onto his with an intensity that made Elias freeze. "It's time," she whispered, barely audible, her voice filled with both fear and determination. Elias's heart skipped a beat. He had read enough medical manuals to know what was happening. She was going into labor. The child was coming, and the time for waiting was over. The woman's hand reached out to him, trembling. "Please," she gasped, "help me. I need you to help my baby." Elias swallowed, trying to steady himself. He wasn't a doctor. He wasn't even trained in childbirth. But there was no choice. He had to help her. The baby needed him. "Okay," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "I'm here. I'll help. Just stay with me." He moved quickly, gathering whatever supplies he could find in the shelter. He had a few basic medical tools, but nothing near what was needed for a birth. His mind raced, but he pushed the panic down. The woman was relying on him, and he couldn't let her down. Not now. The woman's face twisted in pain as another contraction hit her. Elias knelt beside her, his heart aching at the sight of her, suffering. He had never witnessed anything like this before. He had been a soldier, trained for war, for survival. But this was different. This was life and death in a way he had never experienced. "Stay with me," he whispered, holding her hand. "You're doing great." Her eyes met his, her expression filled with gratitude and exhaustion. "I can't do this alone," she whispered, her voice shaking. "Please, stay with me." "I'm here," Elias reassured her. "I won't leave you." With a final, painful scream, the woman's body tensed, and the baby emerged, small and fragile. Elias, his hands shaking, quickly moved to support the newborn, gently lifting it into his arms. The child was tiny, delicate, but alive. It was the most beautiful thing Elias had ever seen. The baby's eyes opened for a moment, revealing the same violet color as the woman's. And then the child let out a soft cry, a sign of life, a sign of hope. The woman's eyes fluttered as she looked at her child, a smile tugging at her lips, despite the pain. He's beautiful," she whispered. "You saved him." Elias held the baby close, feeling its tiny body warm against his chest. The woman's voice was weak now, her strength draining away. "Promise me. Promise me that you'll protect him. He is the future of my people. He is our hope." Elias nodded, tears welling up in his eyes. He didn't know how he was going to protect this child, but he knew one thing for sure. He would do whatever it took. The future of this child, and perhaps the entire galaxy, was in his hands now. "I promise," he said, his voice breaking. "I'll protect him. I'll protect both of you." The woman's smile deepened, and then, with a final breath, she closed her eyes. Elias stayed beside her, holding the child close, feeling the weight of the moment settle over him. She was gone. She had given everything for her baby, for her people, and for hope. Elias gently rocked the child in his arms, his heart heavy with grief but also filled with a fierce determination. The child was alive. The woman's final wish had been fulfilled. But now Elias faced an even greater challenge. The Krath were still out there, searching for survivors. They would stop at nothing to find this child, to destroy any hope of resistance. But Elias wasn't going to let them win. He had made a promise, and he would keep it. With the child in his arms, Elias made a silent vow. No matter what it took, no matter the cost, he would protect this baby. He would ensure that the woman's sacrifice was not in vain. The future was uncertain, and the path ahead would be dangerous. But Elias was ready. He would fight for this child, for the future, and for the hope that had been born in the midst of the darkest time humanity had ever known. The days that followed the birth were filled with a quiet kind of determination. Elias had buried the woman in a small corner of the shelter's hidden courtyard, marking her resting place with a simple stone and a few wildflowers. It was the least he could do for the woman who had given everything for her child, for the future. But now, with the baby in his care, Elias had no time to mourn. The Krath were still out there, their ships lingering in the skies above Earth, searching for any signs of resistance. Elias knew the danger was far from over. His first priority was keeping the baby safe, but the weight of the promise to the mother still burned inside him. He had sworn to protect her child, and he would not fail. The infant, whom Elias had named Kyle, seemed to grow stronger with each passing day. Despite the terrifying circumstances of his birth, the child was healthy, vibrant even. Kyle's violet eyes would often gaze up at Elias with an intensity that made him feel as though the child could understand more than he let on. Elias would catch himself speaking to him as if he were a young adult, though he knew Kyle was still just an infant, helpless and fragile. But there was a connection between them now, a bond that Elias could not explain. It was the same kind of bond a father might feel for a child, though Elias had never been a father before. He had never experienced this feeling of protectiveness, of responsibility for another life. But now, it was as if Kale had become a part of him, a piece of his heart that he couldn't afford to lose. The days passed slowly. The shelter, though hidden well enough to keep them safe for the moment, was far from perfect. Elias did his best to make it as comfortable as possible, creating a small bed for Kale beside him. He would often find himself speaking to the baby, telling him stories of the world outside, the world that was still filled with beauty, even in the face of destruction. "Maybe one day you'll get to see the stars," Elias would say, rocking Kale gently in his arms. "The ones that your mother told me about? She loved the stars, you know. She said they were the one thing that never changed, no matter how much the world shifted." Kyle would stare up at him, his wide, violet eyes reflecting a curiosity that made Elias smile. In those moments, Elias could almost forget the war, the Krath, the danger. In those quiet moments, he was just a man and a child, finding comfort in each other's company. But even as the bond between them grew, Elias knew they couldn't stay hidden forever. The Krath were relentless, and soon enough, they would catch wind of Kale's existence. Elias had heard whispers from the human resistance. Some of them believed that Kale, this child born of a human and an alien, was the key to ending the war. The Krath, too, would believe the same thing. If they found out about him, they would stop at nothing to destroy him. And Elias wouldn't let that happen. As much as he hated it, Elias knew he needed help. He couldn't protect Kale alone forever. There were others out there who would understand the importance of this child, others who could offer protection, guidance. The resistance could be their only chance. So one evening, after Kale had fallen asleep in his arms, Elias decided to leave the shelter. It was a risk, a dangerous one, but it was necessary. He needed to find the resistance, to find people who would help him protect Kale. He packed a small bag with supplies, water, food, basic medical kits, and carefully wrapped Kale in a blanket, making sure he was secure. The baby stirred in his sleep, but Elias whispered a soft lullaby, the words of which he didn't even realize he knew, calming him. Then, with a heavy heart and a quiet resolve, Elias slipped out of the shelter, carrying Kale safely in his arms. The journey to the resistance camp was long and dangerous. Elias moved quickly through the ruins, his senses alert to every sound and movement. The Krath patrols were everywhere, their soldiers scouring the planet for any signs of life, any survivors who might threaten their rule. Elias knew the risks. He had seen the Krath in action before. They were ruthless, merciless, but he couldn't afford to be afraid. He kept his pace steady, avoiding the main roads and sticking to the shadows. He knew that the less attention he attracted, the better. Kyle was his only concern now, and Elias couldn't afford to let anything happen to him. As they approached the outskirts of the resistance camp, Elias's heart began to race. He had heard rumors of the camp's location, but he had never been there himself. The stories told of a group of fighters, humans and aliens alike, who had banded together to resist the Krath's occupation of Earth. If there was any hope left, it was with them. The camp was hidden in a forest, tucked away from the prying eyes of Krath drones. Elias had to pass through thick underbrush, using all his skill to avoid detection. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he reached the edge of the camp. He paused, watching the small group of resistance fighters as they moved about the camp. They were human and alien, working together, living together in a way Elias had never seen before. It was a strange sight in a world so divided, but it was the only hope for survival. Elias approached cautiously, making sure Kyle was still securely wrapped in the blanket. As he got closer, one of the guards at the camp's entrance noticed him. The man's eyes narrowed, his hand moving to the weapon at his side. But Elias held up a hand, signaling that he meant no harm. "I have something important," Elias said, his voice steady but urgent. "A child, a human and alien child. He's the last hope." The guard looked skeptical at first, but Elias's sincerity and the protective way he held the baby in his arms convinced him to lower his weapon. "Come with me," the guard said, motioning for Elias to follow. Inside the camp, Elias was greeted with cautious but curious eyes. He explained his story, the woman, the child, the Krath, and the promise he had made. As he spoke, he noticed the look of realization on the faces of the resistance leaders. They had heard the rumors, too. They had heard of the child who could change everything. One of the leaders, a woman with dark hair and fierce eyes, stepped forward. "You've done well to bring him here," she said. "We will protect him. We will protect you both." Elias nodded, a sense of relief flooding through him. They had made it. Kyle was safe, for now. But Elias knew that this was just the beginning. The Krath would not give up so easily. They would come for the child. And when they did, Elias would be ready. The days at the resistance camp were a blur of activity and vigilance. Elias and Kyle were welcomed with cautious curiosity, the leaders of the camp recognizing the importance of the child and what he represented. The camp was a sanctuary, hidden deep within the forest, far away from the Krath's prying eyes. But Elias knew better than to think they were safe. The Krath were always looking, always hunting for anything that might threaten their control. Elias spent most of his time with Kale, caring for the child, watching over him with a protective eye. The baby's health continued to improve, growing stronger with each passing day. His violet eyes seemed to study everything around him, as if already aware of the weight of the world he had inherited. Elias had never been a father, but as time passed, he found himself growing attached to Kale in ways he hadn't expected. The bond between them was undeniable. He spent hours sitting beside Kale, telling him stories of Earth's past, stories of peace, of beauty, of hope. Elias found himself repeating the words his mother had once said to him when he was a boy. "The world is not defined by the darkness," she had told him, "but by the light we find in it." But even in the quiet moments, Elias could feel the weight of the world pressing down on him. The Krath were still out there. Every day that passed brought them one step closer to discovering the resistance camp, one step closer to destroying everything Elias had worked for. The leaders of the resistance had been kind, offering food, shelter, and protection. But Elias knew that they needed more than that. They needed a plan. Something that could turn the tide of the war, something that could give humanity and its allies the strength to fight back against the Krath. He met with the leaders in a small, dimly lit tent, the air thick with tension. The commander of the resistance, a woman named Lyra, sat across from him, her piercing eyes never leaving his face. She had seen countless battles, survived through the worst the Krath could throw at her, and yet there was a weariness in her gaze that spoke of the years of struggle. Elias knew what was coming. He had already thought about it himself. The time had come for action. They needed to strike back, hard, and they needed to use Kyle as a symbol. "I've been thinking," Elias began, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside him. "We can't keep hiding forever. The Krath will find us eventually, and when they do, we'll be wiped out." Lyra nodded slowly, her eyes narrowed. "We've been preparing for that eventuality. But hiding doesn't give us a chance to win. We need something more, something that can rally the people, something that will show the Krath that we're not broken." Elias leaned forward, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. "What if we use Kale? What if he's the spark we need to ignite a real rebellion?" Lyra's eyes flickered with interest. "A child?" Elias nodded. "Yes, he's not just any child. He's the child of two worlds, a human and an alien. His birth is a symbol, a message that the war isn't over, that we're still here, still fighting. If we use him, we can inspire others. We can rally people to our side." Lyra was silent for a long moment, considering his words. The room was still, the weight of Elias's suggestion hanging in the air. Finally she spoke, her voice low but firm. "You're right. A child like him could be the spark we need. If people see that hope still exists, that we can still fight back, there will be those who will join us, but we can't just use him as a symbol. We need to protect him at all costs." Elias's heart skipped a beat. He had already promised to protect Kale, but hearing Lyra's words made the responsibility even clearer. Kale wasn't just a child. He was the future. The last hope of humanity and the alien species that had fallen to the Krath. "I'll do whatever it takes to keep him safe," Elias said, his voice unwavering. "We can't fail him. We can't fail her." Lyra's gaze softened, but there was no doubt in her eyes. "We'll fight, but it's not going to be easy. The Krath have the entire planet under their control, and they won't hesitate to destroy us." Elias's expression hardened. "Then we'll fight back. We'll show them that humanity, all of humanity, isn't something they can crush. We'll make them see that." As they discussed their plan, Elias felt a growing sense of purpose. For the first time since the war began, he could see a way forward, a way to strike at the heart of the Krath's power. They couldn't fight the Krath head-on, not yet. But they could undermine their control, break their grip on Earth, and inspire a new wave of resistance. Kale would be their rallying point, a symbol of everything they were fighting for. But even as Elias made plans, he couldn't ignore the nagging feeling in the back of his mind. The Krath were always watching. Their reach was long, their power vast. If they found out about Kyle, if they realized what he represented, they wouldn't hesitate to eliminate him. They wouldn't give them a chance to organize, to fight back. That night, Elias couldn't sleep. The weight of the decision sat heavily on his shoulders. He knew the risks. If they used Kale as a symbol of rebellion, they would be marking him as a target. The Krath would come for him, and they would stop at nothing to destroy him. But Elias wasn't afraid. For the first time in his life, he felt a fire inside him, something stronger than fear. It was the fire of a father protecting his child, the fire of a man who had seen enough destruction to last a lifetime. He would fight. He would protect Kale and every person who believed in the future. As the sun began to rise over the resistance camp, Elias stood by the small window, staring out at the horizon. The world was broken, but there was still hope. Kyle was the spark they needed, the beacon of light in a darkened world, and Elias would make sure that spark never went out. The days following the decision to use Kale as a symbol were filled with urgency. Elias could feel the tension growing in the resistance camp. Plans were being made, supplies were being gathered, the time to act was coming closer, and every day that passed only brought them closer to a final confrontation with the Krath. Elias spent most of his time with Kale, making sure the baby was well cared for. The child had grown stronger, now beginning to make small noises and show the first signs of curiosity about the world around him. Elias marveled at how quickly the baby was developing, but he knew that the growing strength of Kale wasn't the only thing the Krath would notice. It was the symbol that the child had become. The child born of two worlds, the last hope of both, humanity and the alien race that had fallen to the Krath. The resistance leaders, including Lyra, had made their own preparations. They were readying the fighters, training them for what was to come. Elias could see it in their eyes. The fire of rebellion, the belief that this time they could win, they could make a stand, they could take back their world. But Elias knew that this would be no easy fight. The Krath were powerful, and their forces were vast. They had destroyed entire civilizations. They had crushed every resistance they had encountered. And now they were hunting for Kale. They would stop at nothing to erase the symbol of hope that the child had become. Lyra called a meeting of the leaders, and Elias was there to hear their plans. The air in the meeting tent was thick with anticipation. Maps were spread out across the table showing the locations of Krath patrols, key strategic points, and supply lines. But there was something else, something even more important than the maps. It was the knowledge that the resistance was no longer just fighting for survival. They were fighting for a future. "We've waited long enough," Lyra said, her voice steady but filled with determination. "We've been hiding. But now it's time to show the Krath that we're not broken. We're not scared. We are ready to take back our world." Elias nodded. He had seen the strength in these people, the will to fight. They weren't going to back down. Not this time. "We'll start by hitting the Krath supply lines," Lyra continued, pointing to the map. "Take out their resources, disrupt their movements, and show them that we're more than just a small group of survivors. We are a force." Elias felt a sense of resolve settle in him. The first strike would be a test. If it worked, it would give the resistance a chance to grow. But it would also put Kale directly in the path of the Krath. He would be their target. The child could be their weapon or their downfall. It was a dangerous gamble, but it was the only way to move forward. "We need to be quick," Elias said, speaking up for the first time. "We don't have the luxury of time. If we give them a chance to regroup, they'll crush us. The Krath will come for Kyle. We can't let them take him." Lyra's eyes met his, understanding in them. "We'll move as one. This is our moment. We strike hard and fast, and we make sure Kale is protected." Elias nodded. The plan was in motion. There was no turning back now. That night, as the camp prepared for the assault, Elias sat by Kyle, watching the child sleep. His small chest rose and fell with each breath, and Elias found himself unable to look away. This child was everything, the hope for the future, the reason they were fighting, the reason he was fighting. Elias had never known a feeling like this. Before Kale, he had fought because it was his duty. He had fought because he was a soldier, but now he fought because there was something worth protecting. There was something more than just survival. There was the chance for peace, the chance to rebuild. As the first light of dawn broke across the sky, Elias knew that the time had come. The resistance was moving out. The first strike would begin today. But even as he joined the others in preparation, he couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled in his chest. The Krath were relentless, and if they found out about Kale's role in the rebellion, they would come for him with everything they had. The sound of weapons being prepared, the hushed voices of the resistance, all of it seemed distant as Elias focused on the child in his arms. Kyle stirred as Elias stood, his small hands reaching up, as if sensing the tension in the air. Elias smiled softly and held him close, whispering promises he wasn't sure he could keep. "We'll make it," Elias said quietly, more to himself than to Kale. "We'll make sure you grow up in a world where there's peace." The attack began quickly, with Elias and the resistance fighters moving swiftly and silently through the forest. The target was a Krath supply depot, and the goal was to disrupt their resources, slow them down. The first wave of fighters moved in, planting explosives and sabotaging equipment. It was chaos, controlled chaos. The Krath forces retaliated, but the resistance was swift and efficient. As the battle raged, Elias moved through the forest, keeping a close eye on Kyle. Every moment felt like a lifetime, every step a risk. But Elias didn't hesitate. He couldn't afford to. The child's future depended on their success. The explosions rocked the Krath base, sending soldiers scattering in every direction. The resistance fighters fought with everything they had, knowing that this was their chance to make a difference. Elias stayed in the shadows, always protecting Kale, always making sure the child was safe. Just as they were about to pull back, the Krath forces arrived in full force. Their ships filled the sky, blocking out the sun, casting a shadow over the battlefield. The final fight had begun. Elias felt his heart race as the Krath soldiers stormed in, their weapons raised. They had found them. They had found Kale. But Elias was ready. He had promised to protect the child, and he would fight to his last breath to keep that promise. The first Krath soldier advanced, and Elias fired. The shot was clean, precise. The battle was on, and there was no turning back.